This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered legal, medical, or mental health advice. We speak from our personal experiences and opinions. The views expressed are solely those of the individual speaker and are not intended to malign any group, club, organization, or business.
Welcome to Confronting the Line, where we talk about the world of personal development and the line between exploitation and transformation that sometimes occur. My name is Mark Tafoya. I'm here with Ann L. Peterson, author of the book, Is This a Cult? Hi, Ann.
Hi, Mark.
Well, we are so excited for our conversation today, which is going to be a little different from some of the other conversations we've had, a bit of an open-ended conversation. We have a wonderful guest. Do you want to introduce him, Ann?
I'm super excited, Mark, because Exene and I, some people may have met him who've been following these shows. Brian Nord had you on, and y'all were talking when we first started talking about this pseudo, sometimes kind of very culty group, Landmark, that we've all been very much a part of, leaders and staff and program leaders, all that. So, and as we've been talking about that, Exene and I have been talking a lot about the power dynamics and the privilege dynamics that are embedded in a lot of the personal development space and the work and the all the way from the programs. And we've just been having all these great conversations. So I was like, well, we should just have some on the show and explore this, because I think, what I'm committed to in confronting the line between exploitation and transformation is where we started. But, I'm passionate about this line thing, because when we're on the line, that's when we can see more. If we're on the line between light and dark, we can look into the dark side. We can look into the light side. We can look forward, we can look backwards. When we're fully in it, our view is very limited, right? If all we're in is the dark, we can only see the dark. If all we're in is the light, we can only see the light. So when I say confronting the line, the confront is usually confronting ourselves to get to the line, because getting to the line means I'm going to maybe see some stuff that I don't like, or that I don't agree with, or that I don't understand, or that I don't know about. I happen to be one of those people that likes that space a lot. And Exene, I think you are too. That's why we've resonated a lot. So I'm excited to have this exploration with you as we begin to look at and start to unpack the inherent power and privilege dynamics that are in that whole space. So why don't we start by you telling us a little bit about, I told Exene, give us the Reader Digest version of who you are, and maybe a little bit of I think through that it'll come out why you're also into this topic.
Sure. Reader's
and in a
Digest.
unique position to speak about it.
Yes. Yeah. Why am I the one chiming in here? So, I think the easiest answer, if it's not becoming super evident just by looking at me, is, there is a certain kind of being on the outside of things that I've always kind of taken. It's always had in me since I was 15-ish or so, getting into punk rock a long time ago, and being led into, thinkers like Noam Chomsky, and reading things, Howard Zinn and People's History of the United States, just kind of like getting that view of what are the actual dynamics that are all around us that are, as they say, the fish to the water. The fish doesn't know that the water is there, and so you're just swimming around and doing your thing,
Right.
Which in self-help, we use this analogy all the time about our own personal kind of viewpoints, but there are these larger forces, right? These not accidents. They're not necessarily accidental. They're being held in place for the benefit of certain folks and the loss of other folks perpetually. So there's that version. Then there was my landmark career somewhere in the middle of that, and having to basically having to set all that aside and letting go of that. Let's not help the world that way. Let's help the world over here, because holy shit, this is the answer, right? And going through all that fun experience that most of us went through, and lighting up and then going through and then wanting to take that on. So I was a landmark person, forum, all the main courses. I moved out west to basically go on staff, driving back and forth from Vegas to LA all the time for the ILE, went on staff for about a year or so, literally left staff because I was so devoted, so it's
Oh, really?
a real odd. Even how I left staff was because of stuff I had read about what Werner claimed to have done in his biography, and giving himself a set of conditions of satisfaction, either on the 50s or throw me out.
Right.
Now, of course, staff doesn't throw people out. They will just keep using you until there's nothing left, right? And so I had to throw myself out, and I did that once, and it worked. And I got all the teams were full, all that kind of crap. And then I did it again like a month and a half later, because the same slide, because nothing had been addressed. And it turns out it's a bullshit job that's not actually winnable. So there was plenty of people were doing their jobs worse, like we're in a worse shape in their department than but I just I couldn't handle that. I'm like, oh, let me get out of the way so the work can work. And I became I already was a course supervisor and did that for a few more years.
For our audience, let me just say real quick. So for our audience, the course supervisor is the person who sort of manages the production of the main programs, the forum, the advanced course, holds the room, manages the team, typically always a volunteer, although we'll give Landmark its due. They have changed those to paid positions now. Although they've mostly taken the positions away, actually, because they don't do in-person programs. A few, but yeah, we were doing hundreds.
Yeah.
So big teams of volunteers. And so as a course supervisor, you manage those teams and whatnot. That's interesting that you said the thing about that whole, like, I'm going to put my ass on the line, I'm going to make this promise, and then, and then I'm going to take myself out if it doesn't work. Like that whole, I don't know what that's called. I call it kind of the pain to pleasure. Cause it's like under threat, I shall perform, which I think has been a huge part of the whole personal development field. And one of the aspects that we're becoming to understand that is only really good for short-term results at best.
Yeah.
It doesn't, you can't get to any kind of long-term change, certainly not transformation.
No, you're just repeating. Repeating the pressure, which it took me twice of that cycle. And I was like, well, no. And luckily I promised, and that meant something, right? Obviously. So I was like, oh, no, I didn't do this. And they said, oh, no, listen, hey, you can revoke a prop. All of a sudden, the revoking part of integrity matters a lot more. And I was just like, no, let me get out. And that's because, I was a sponge then too. When I came on board, I learned all the stuff. I was on staff. I was taking transcripts from the LA Center of Werner's visits to the center from back in the day, where he was training the forum leaders in the new forum. He was coming and doing events. I was reading that stuff. I was listening to the tapes. And so in the world of the emulating, the taking on, if oh, this guy is how it's supposed to be, I was in that. I did a great impression.
Yeah.
And as we all are doing better Werner impressions than we're aware of, because so many of the mannerisms and even the speech patterns in that place are just that guy. And so we all come out going bah, 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 and saying all the stupid shit.
And
from
like that.
So and then I went into coming off staff, supervising. I moved to Austin. I moved back here to New York, and in 2009 became a technical affiliate. So I became a consultant with one of the firms that's licensed to use the work in businesses. And my version of that was very much this mix that most people are in this kind of community that's come up can't really relate to, because I was not in some full immersion. Every other aspect of my life was existing in the actual world. And then there's the technical conversations, but I wasn't with one of the big firms. And so there was no constant, I was the most, kind of avid member at the time, in a way that I was looking to build business, and then had to deal for years with how the narratives of the work itself, right? The efficacy of the work itself, the adaptability of the work itself, the narratives and how they clash with narratives that other people have in the world, and they're living by. And how that's not always, the answer turns out always wasn't for them to change their narrative to mine or to Landmark's. And that is where a lot of the very apparent, having a relationship with, and then my wife, who had a lot of, CPTSD for her background. I mean, a background story, we're not together anymore, but, no issue with her whatsoever. And after all those years in those rooms, hearing horrifying shit, right? You don't spend a lot of time in forums without hearing some of the most horror. This was by far out of all the marginalized people I'd hung out with back in the day, you know, like the weirdos and the outside, like just, you know, and she couldn't even be in that environment. Like you put her in like an intro room at this little seminar at the fucking Holiday Inn Express or whatever we had it at in Buffalo. And she, you know, like she stayed to 3 hours or whatever, because that's what you're supposed to do. And then never came back again. She's like, I will never, she would listen to me listening to Werner tapes and be like, that guy sounds like a maniac. Like what is, you know, and so I started to have that, oh, this, doesn't really like lands weirdly with certain kinds of folks. And the folks who had been abused by certain kinds of people in particular, right? Like the harsh, screamy, you know, for some folks, some yelly guy telling everybody how they should live their lives is A, not super new. And B, not really workable. Like she is definitely someone that if she would have attempted to be in a forum, there would have been a problem, right? Like that is not designed, you know, for that. And, you know, she could have gotten her way in, but we didn't get her anywhere near it. And I started to see at that point those patterns. And I started to also see who became my clients, you know, as I'm out selling, because unlike a lot of consultants and unlike some of the former forum leaders, when they come out and they have a reverence, you know, people are like, holy shit, Peter, and that must be incredible. And like, you know, they have their practices just spring up around them. Good old universe attracting. There's nothing else to do there. It's just a person in the universe. But like that was, how am I getting like, I mean, I wasn't quite looking like this at the time, right? But like I had there's a certain buy-in. And like all the clients that I would end up getting and then lining up with went 2 ways. One was either they were artists, you know, they were former artists who had started businesses, they were creative types, right? And they needed someone who knew a little more about structures and a little more about that. And like they needed small business consulting, less of the like, your fucking life doesn't work. The people who responded to the work were conservative largely, which makes a whole lot of sense when you're leading with, you know what the key to literally everything, as Mark Heyman used to say, the keys to the kingdom, responsibility, personal responsibility, right? We're gonna change it, make it less like a demand, but also even wider and bigger, and then your personal integrity, right? Keeping your word and your promises, you know, the whole like idealism, my word is more important than my body, my feelings, my emotions, the people around me in some cases. Like these are not, they are not new. They are not radical. They don't have any kind of progress. And I'm like, of course, when you spout those things, like a roofing company, you know, 150-year-old family business roofing company led by like evangelicals level, you know, like they, you know, and then they would be like, whoa, oh, well, you're not the kind of vibe. And, you know, we would be able to get some work done until the thing you mentioned kicked in. And the thing where like that intervention style has a real short shelf life. And if you're good at what you're doing and not just using that, like, and so as a consultant, luckily you learn you have to start actually using other stuff, right? You have to bring in other stuff to be effective. This shit doesn't save everything. It doesn't save anything. And so you'd build around it. But of course, if it's based around they look to you for accountability, they look to you for structure, they're looking for you for all the outside perspective and to give it in. Even if you are an expert in something, like it just runs its course, right? Coaching runs its course with folks, you know, like the relationship's the most important thing, but that hardcore, and I'm a master. Like I can spot stuff in what Werner said, I could mimic him. My dad yelled plenty in my life, you know, just a maniac of a human being generally. And so like, if you need someone to get in front of a room and get real arty, it's in here, it's built in.
Well, let's pause for a moment and take a few pieces apart here. So one of the things you've mentioned,
what you said already,
well, it's so good, right? So one of the things that you said, and I want to kind of clarify for our audience, the work. So the work is what the tech is called in landmarking. Right. So, and it's also been called tech, and which is more commonly known in the Scientology world, the Exene world. But basically, every personal development, self-help, business, because like they have a kind of way of referencing to what honestly, they really think are their original ideas. So, are there, so when we say the work, what we're referring to in the landmark vernacular is basically Werner's work. So, and Werner is known as the source. And, but this kind of wild thing happened, right? So Werner, becomes famous in the S days, and, we'll have lots of guests on that'll tell us about how that happened and they were there and all that as we go forward. Cause I just find it really fascinating. I'm committed. I'm talking about this stuff because I'm committed to the future of the personal development space. I think we need it, but we need it to be a hell of a lot better than it is now. And it needs to grow up to what we are demanding of it now. We have evolved beyond what I think is the sort of historical bent towards personal development or self-help, which is why I was excited to talk to Exene about this. But so the work refers to the distinctions, which one of my funniest afternoons recently in the deconstruction process was actually looking up the word distinction and seeing that there's nothing in the definition that is used the way we use it at Landmark. So it's one of the words that have been redefined.
Yeah.
But a distinction is basically referring to the ideas and the concept, usually with a process.
In the way that they use it. It's not actually a noun.
No, it's not actually a noun. Yeah, we distinguish this from that, which is interesting though, because at the heart of all the work that Werner brought forward, which was, definitely he put together, he did what a lot of inventors do. He took a whole bunch of ideas from a bunch of places and he put them together in a semi-unique way. The more I study, the more I'm understanding it's not as nearly as unique as I was led to believe.
Yeah.
But an interesting thing happens, a little segue in the Werner world, is when I come in the 90s, 1995, this guy's been erased. He was erased, completely erased, which is a lot of what the upset in the sort of current landmark world is. He was erased from really when he left in 1990, 1991, until erased from the community, right? Discourse.
He's gone. He's not here.
In a corporate Q&A in terms of, is this est? Because you would always get that in a guest room and you were like, no, this is not est. This is based on the ideas of Werner Erhard, blah, blah, blah. We had a whole thing. But we were told he was not a part of the organization or the enterprise at all. And it wasn't really until in the mid 2000s, 2015, 2014, that he started to show up in the landmark worlds. I was gone by then, but I was working with him. So I was seeing it from the other side as he watched a landmark forum, promptly declared it was total shit. They had completely screwed it up. And, comes back in and starts consulting. I knew he was working with the affiliates, which were the Technico, the licensees, the folks like you guys that were licensed. I've now since learned that he's always been the guy in the basement pulling the strings. He's always been the guy.
So less of he's not here anymore and more of a ignore the man behind the curtain.
Right.
Yeah. Wizard of Oz.
But why I think that's relevant to today's topic, that's all just by way of saying, so a body of work that is created by a guy, he's 88 years old now. So comes into, this whole field really emerges in the late 60s, 70s, 80s. And the thinking of that time, including how do we, evolution wasn't even really a thing, right? How do we get ourselves to be better, the best version of ourselves, was this highly confrontational style. You get in someone's face with total love and complete ruthlessness, two words I now think should never be put in the same sentence, but are a hallmark of so much self-help and personal development. Get in your face and scream until your brain unlocks, basically. It's kind of what happens. So it sounds like you really admired that style. You flourished to a certain degree under that sort of style. What would you say?
It's something that you can just do, right? Then you're drawn to it. So not so much about the validity of it. I mean, that is a style available. And again, in the world of it's not just landmark. Because I know for a while we was like, well, every time someone says, well, it's not just landmark, we have to like watch out because are they about to do a deflection, as we've seen?
Yeah.
Not just
Mhm.
landmark. Let me tell you a story about Microsoft. You know, like, cool, that's turning out great
Yeah.
too.
Everybody
and-
cheats on their taxes, right?
Right.
Yeah, it's not just
Everybody beats their
okay,
employees,
you know, it's
strangles
Don't
them.
worry about
it's not-
integrity, though, right?
yeah, and so we want to have a conversation that like acknowledges, of course, it's not right.
Yeah.
Now, and I say, of course, because anything that exists inside of something already, right?
Mm.
Like it didn't spring up. Nobody,
Right.
nobody created this from nothing. Nobody creates really much of anything from nothing. That's a cute story we tell ourselves to ignore the past and shut off options that explain why we're here, right? Like when we were coming on here today, Mark asked, you know, like, oh, what area am I? You know, like I'm in Buffalo, New York, and I'm sitting in my chair, which kind of tells you already, I guess there's a past. Like I didn't just pop up here, right? Like it's like, but there's like that kind of a thinking where, no, this is somehow independent. What I'm going to say next, what I'm going to do is independent of all of these things, which Landmark itself says, well, no, because all these things factor into how the world occurs and then how you respond as a natural. And then they just fucking ignore literally 99% of what dictates how the world occurs to people. And just break it down to their own personal feelings. You know, they still break it down to the internal stuff because that's the only stuff they can speak about especially without ruffling feathers, which, you know, will probably happen because there's plenty of them are people who ideologically, let's say, aren't going to naturally agree with some of the stuff that gets said here. But that is their approach, which is classic Landmarks. You know, like what they're saying is kind of true. And then they don't quite use it that way. And so I think acknowledging, yeah, that came up in that context. Now, even then, that wasn't the only way, right? Now, it's the way I was drawn to. I'm in punk bands, like we're screaming, like we're out, like we're yelling, right? I'm confrontational and still, like I'm an agitator person, right? Like, and that's okay. So that came from wherever it came from. And I'm just leaning into it at this point and then finding that as long as it's authentically me versus something that's handed, like, and so there's that vibe. So I wasn't going to go out to a meditation retreat for freaking 3 days with a bunch of people wearing.
I want to highlight something you just said though, because there's something really important about what you just said about you. So you are that way, you know, you are, you know, the yelling, the da 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 da. But I've talked to you enough to know, and you don't hurt other people. So this is one of the false equivalencies that I've heard a little bit. Like people are like, oh, why are you? Somebody was accusing us the other day, Mark and I, of starting a revenge cult, which we don't even know what that is, but it does kind of sound a little cool, actually. But
man,
the whole
great tattoo idea.
How would that even work, right? Yeah,
I'm not sure how that works, but you know, because I'm not out for revenge. I'm really curious. I am out for a better self-development space because I am a product. I was a teen mom with, you know, little options, a little money, little resources that I could go to a 3-day and an evening workshop and actually start to break up my personal story and move in life in ways that I didn't think were available to me. Like that's incredible. And I want to preserve that.
Yeah.
I'm actually out to preserve that. And if we don't upgrade and grow up and kind of expand our view, being those of us that are leaders in this field, we're going to die. We're going to die off, just like the people who sold buggy whips and, you know, all the other kind of industries, at least our version of it. But you just made a really great point. Like, yeah, that style, that like, come on, let's go, you know, getting in your face, so to speak. I just have a real curiosity if that can even be done in a way that isn't abusive, given what we now know about the brain. We did not know then. And I want to highlight for sure, lots of people and lots of leaders at Landmark even have engaged in that, and they didn't necessarily put their hands on somebody's throat and threaten their breath, which, by the way, is a key move from the source, which is part of why it's so shocking. Like somebody just doesn't randomly start doing that in an organization. And, you know, that doesn't pop up, and it's popped up in this organization. And, you know, that's a little step beyond the confrontational transformation style.
Right. Well, and that's I think there is a way. I have personally less of a concern. Like, that's not what I'm in this conversation for, like it is for you, right?
Yeah.
And we talked to Brian, and like, it's like, that's the sorting it out. How do we get here vibe? And here's the, like, well, let's take a look vibe. And my vibe and agitator is, yeah, as a personality trait, I guess, like, that's how I express it. But like, also functionally, like, I am, an abolitionist. I'm an anarchist. That's how it goes. Now that'll go fucking wild because nobody knows what it means, and they don't.
I was gonna say, you better say
Yeah.
what that means to you.
You want to abolish all governments and start a revolution, a bloody revolution?
I just do whatever the hell I want all the time. And screw everybody. No, what it means is, I think power, basically dominance hierarchies, are a bad thing. I think the power structure, which is how we built most of our power structures, I think it's not just this group or another group, or if it's men or if it's women or if it's whatever. I think when you put people above other people and you give people power over other people, there are cliches about this, right?
Mhm.
Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And, we're talking about someone who, in a relatively small group, a large community that had a large wave and ripple out, had absolute power. I don't think that's ever going to work. And I don't think, like, systems built around that, I think, have seen their day. And I think the world is shaking that stuff loose, and I'm fucking here for it. Like, I'm here to help, and not just to, like, bring it down and burn it down. There's no, in life, I do community work. We work in groups, and we make sure that we have mutual aid networks going. So it's not nonprofit shit because somebody's getting powerful and rich off that too. It's, what do we need for ourselves? How do we build that together? What's the kind of thing that could give us some relief, some quality of life, some power now, like real power, like the ability to get the shit done in life I need to, in some cases meaning eat and get medicine and like real basic stuff. So like, we create that on our own in my world. And so for me, dominance hierarchies, right? Structures that are about people having power over other people inherently are to be questioned. And I mean, question is the polite word. They're to be like you throw them out, and then you figure out how to create a structure, how to build something that like people are actually equal in, and that people could, like, you can't volunteer freely, right? Like workplaces, right? You don't, well, just get a job somewhere else. Like, that's cute. That's cute. If you don't, if you're like in a wildly privileged position, you don't like the state, just move. That's cute. If you're in a wildly privileged position, all the answers, what I'm saying, my response will be, that's cute if, and then I've got something else to say about it, right? So that is my kind of core tenet, like taking power, like literally empowering people by like spreading power through who actually needs it, and not funneling it up everwards into the world of saviors and gurus and presidents and fucking whatever, emperors and like the rest of it, like it's the, how do we build this here? And so I'm inherently suspicious of those kinds of things, especially the ones that landmark, which we've all realized, especially from the upper levels up, are just fully, you've given away your power. You claim you still have it, but you've literally signed on to be someone else's extension and mimic. And even if they were accurate about the shit working, which they are not, like there's a reason the rest of these fields moved on over 40 years since these stream in your face days. Organizational development has moved on.
Right.
All the actual fields in the world have moved on, while landmark circles closer to their original shit. Like they go backwards, and it's still fueling this person, and then the sycophants around him that then wander out in the world and have more power over people. People like believe in these people like they're something special. And it's like, fuck no, buddy. It's just, we're just people. And some of them are pretty shitty people, frankly.
And Exene, I think it's important to note that all of what you just said, like the very beginning part of it, people will be like, wait, there are power structures in the world that are set up as a dominance? They're like, what are you talking about, right? And it's like, it's right in front of our faces, but so it's like, it's the water to the fish, it's the air to the birds. We don't notice it. Like, so much of what's built into the way it is just so structurally in there that most people are like, what are you talking about? No, I'm free to do what I want. I'm going to pull myself up by my bootstraps, and I'm going to work hard, and I just got to be responsible, and I have to work with integrity. Again, great ideas, great principles, but when you've got this entire thing that's holding you down, and you don't even see it. I mean, that's the part we have to.
Can be helpful sometimes, in some contexts, in certain situations, and most of us don't live in most of those situations most of the time. And I'm in a very privileged, like, I'm a strong, confident sounding, what people see as white dude, right? I'm actually like non-binary, so let me throw that out, because then people will just keep fucking up my pronouns forever.
Yeah. And by the way, what are your preferred pronouns? We should say this on the podcast. What are your preferred pronouns? Okay, perfect.
They, them. Yeah, they, them. And last time I brought this up, it triggered somebody actively. So, let me just run that out.
Let's tell me what you think of this. So, I'd like to actually illustrate this a little bit. So, we've been kind of geeking out on these conversations. So, I want to bring folks in a little. And, for me, when I wrote the book, I kind of have life before the book and life after the book. Because when I wrote the book that I wrote, which says, hey, the source is got some issues, and y'all are tying yourselves back up to the source publicly at a time when you're in crisis, and alert. In my view, that's the wrong direction. And it was the wrong direction simply because I knew that the source has an issue with abusing people. So physically, verbally assaulting people that work for him. And when I came to know that and see that and really get that, I'm not one of those kind of people that can just go like, okay, and I can't leave others there. Like, that doesn't work for me.
Yeah.
And so when I put the book out in very general, I haven't said any of all the dirty details that I know. And trust me, I know them. I'm not out to be salacious. I'm not out to ruin this man's life. I'm not out for any of that. What I'm out for is to say, hey, alert, something is wrong here. Now, what I've found out since the book came out is that it turns out that a leader's personality, including the dark sides of their personality, becomes an organization's culture. So there's a culture in Landmark that, in my opinion, takes care of, creates room for predators. Because there's this whole thing, and it's not just in Landmark, but it's very strong in Landmark. We don't judge people. Their CFO happens to be a convicted for financial fraud. And they're like, well, we give people a second chance. Okay. I'm not inherently against that. I don't happen to think that a Landmark forum is going to cure whatever has a person do those kinds of crimes or to do those kinds of things, right? So there's a bunch going on here. So, but let's start with the hierarchical piece you're bringing up. So there's this guy who's the source. The whole organization is built on his personality. Because even when he exits the scene, you come in years and years later and you get the message loud and clear. If you want to win in this organization, if you want to win in the work, you got to be like this guy. So you, young Exene, how old were you when you?
Let me see. That would have been about 23, I think.
23. Like so almost a full prefrontal cortex, but not quite.
Yeah.
So conveniently war age. The age. I mean, want to talk about some exploitation? We can take you there too. That's when there's a big defense on one of our YouTube things that screaming in your face, yelling, that kind of what literally constitutes verbal abuse is actually transformation. I'm like, no, that's freezing your brain.
Yeah.
And if I were being trained to go into battle where somebody's trying to kill me, learning how to operate past that kind of brain freeze is relevant.
Yeah.
So in the military, it's got a relevance, whether we agree or disagree, but we could at least probably agree that it's relevant. Now,
but this isn't life or death.
This is not like, this is like, how do I communicate better with my husband?
Yeah.
How do I start a business of my dreams?
I want to be able to speak in front of the people at work and not freeze up.
Yeah. So, but there is that and I think a lot of people that participate, certainly in Landmark, but in a lot of these groups, they don't understand it came from some place, and that place is still revered. Is still the model through which to get at. So to me, that's where the hierarchical thing starts. Now everybody's, even if the people are changing in and out, it's all still trying to be this personality.
Right. Yeah. And it just naturally is, right? Because like you pull Werner out of the scene, and he was largely gone. Now if you're on staff and you're talking to forum leaders and stuff, like there was no like, oh no, Werner's been fully gone, nobody thinks about this guy anymore. It's really obvious when and that was the thing of being on staff but also being part supervisor. You're the kind of interacting with the forum leaders more often than most of the other kind of program leaders, agreement type things. You're just, if you're on a course, right? Like you're the one who's getting that treatment. And so like
you're
that
organizing their meals and their tea and their coffee.
Yeah.
I mean, like you're really involved in their intimate life
from
day to day
cozy
during that week.
Yeah, you're taking the brunt of their frustration, which is like half of your job, is they can scream at you so that they can be less abusive in the rooms than they used to be, and like, honor some of those policies. It was a rolling downhill thing. But Werner leaves, and then let's say if you came in after a certain era and it was like the TP&E bullshit, right? Transformation, possibility, and enrollments. And so then you got, Steve Zaffron reading all of these documents and shit, and they're listening to him on tapes for reading the versions that he has put out. And then there's like the seminar, there's this stuff. But like, yeah, I mean, Steve Zaffron, speaking of former con artists who then got brought in, and I don't think there are second chances. Like, that's my opinion, just to be clear. We don't need to get the specs on this fucking thing. So, like, yeah, giving people who have been in the legal system second chance, like, I'm all for that. Because most people end up in legal systems, like, and there's some kind of bullshit involved.
Because of all those structures.
These fucking white guys who are stealing from other people, not that. There are a lot of people in jail and who have been in jail, and it's fully a function of their circumstances and their attributes in most cases. Yeah. And that ain't the case for Steve or whoever the CFO. Like, these are people, that to you, right? Yeah, these are people who know how to confidently, like a confidence man, who know how to like take shit from people. And then you have Steve doing a Werner impression, right? Because it's just natural, because you're just living 24/7 in the shadow. So all these other versions are still that same thing. And because of the nature of dominance and power hierarchy, of course that goes down. Like, I mean, even like Alan and your interview with Alan, he was talking about Microsoft, right? And he like the taking certain things for granted, like, hey, it has to start top down, which was a good point to make, right? Given the conversation we're having, like, yeah, this is not a bottom up kind of thing, because that's not how it's built. But we have that assumption, the water to the fish, that like, oh, this is, like it's a human thing. It's either a landmark, a specific person thing, or it's this like human being thing. And those are our two options. And it's just like
there's a lot in between there.
Yeah, there's so many layers. And one of them is it only works to change the culture top down because you've built the fucking organization, the system, as a top-down hierarchy. If anyone had any power anywhere else except for whatever maniac is screaming CEO, like then you could change cultures. But because the people at the top have power, and then they hire consultants to come in and, I mean, he said that part well, squeeze all you can out of the people without changing themselves, then that that's not going to work, because you're not changing the nexus of power, which is always at the top no matter what you do. So for me, structurally, maybe there's a different way, but also we also see in that same example, because I sent this to you the other day, and how that's gone for Microsoft, since that was a great example of culture change from the top down. Yeah. They played a bunch of bullshit games, and they said a bunch of things, which if you listen to him describe them, those are obviously not true. There's no way your upper management in a corporation like that is only measured on, are you people feeling good? Do people feel coached? Like, no. Also, there's performance. And you might not be screaming like a Steve Ballmer, who has a master class, I think I just saw advertised on the internet for leadership. Wow. But now Microsoft is fully divested from all their DEI initiatives. They've like just let the whole department go and said it's no longer business critical, as if it was ever
So
anything
let's
but critical. So like that is the nature of top down, is even when you change it, if you don't change how power is structured and like what is available to people, then you're not likely to really ever change that.
You're going to
culture,
get more,
frankly.
better, different.
Yeah.
Well, what do you think about, so two things. So it occurs to me that, so one of the things, and this is one of the things I've been trying to talk about a lot since my book, I'm like, just, we were misinformed about one thing that was very, very important, which is we were really taught that the source of our transformation was Landmark or our participation at Landmark. If you were very advanced, like I was, I would never say it was Landmark, but I would say it was your participation at Landmark.
Yeah.
That still puts the source of transformation, which is, we could do a whole other show on how I'm now starting to think that's bullshit. But the whole, because things aren't, you've alluded to it a couple of times, it doesn't just happen. You don't say tree and tree happens. Like we don't, as human beings, we evolve, we grow, we maturate. And it's an ongoing process. It's not an overnight process. Now I can have an insight to see something differently, but we always put the source of that either on the leader or on the organization. And my point is to say, no, we're the source of it. I mean, somebody said on our group the other day, like she gets some of her best transformation from her conversations with the bus driver in the morning. And I loved that. I was like, that's so great. Quote unquote, insight, which I like better than transformation, is available every day, all the time, in hundreds of conversations.
Yeah.
But in this organization, and like the ones like it, you are really taught that to give the credit over to the leader or to the ideology. So that's one of the things I was going to ask you. You think the hierarchical thing can be transferred to the ideology itself or to the ideas themselves? Because I think a lot of people most of the people that participate in Landmark programs, I don't think they really think of Werner much. Or as a sort. Once you're in the leader bodies, hell yeah. And more than ever, somebody was telling me the other day that a longtime person she's known who's been a forum leader forever and ever is not, talking with her anymore because she doesn't buy into that Werner is the source. And this person's like, well, if you don't think Werner's the source of transformation, then I don't know if we can be friends. Now, if that ain't culty, I don't know what is.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so there's this whole hierarchical thing that happens. So there's this mythology that Werner's gone. No, Werner's there in the form of, at the very least, his ideas. And he does actively, depending on his health, he's actively on calls and things like that. So it is direct. But then this entire body of forum leaders. So let's talk about that for a second.
Yeah. The replication of that behavior. Yeah.
Their job, I had somebody tell me this less than a month ago, that their job is to be Werner's work in the world. That's what it is to be a designated forum leader.
Well, and the seminar leaders too. Like they told us that too.
To be Werner's work?
Yeah. That
like
you
using
are
his
Werner.
name and everything?
You are going to lead a Werner seminar. You have to be Werner leading the seminar. That's what they told us.
What year was that?
2020.
It's so amazing. So Harry likes to make a big deal that I left in 2012, which thank God. Yeah. So I left Landmark in 2012.
Yeah.
But then I went and worked, collaborated, hosted work.
And I left the seminar leader body in 2020. The weekends for about the last year were all, you have to lead a Werner seminar. You have to lead a Werner seminar. That's not a Werner seminar. Oh, who are you being? That's not being Werner. Like.
What the actual?
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. See, that's what I mean. I didn't know this stuff when I published, but I was trying to give a warning sign. Little did I know my warning was about 50 years too late. So anyway, but it was a warning for me because my whole participation, he was lore. He wasn't part of it, but the ideology, the ideas were the best. I mean, I sacrificed 26 years of my life rather than go to school and get an education, rather than, actually work a job that would give me a real pension and a real, all these things. I went to work there because I was like, okay, this is the most powerful form of transformation I've experienced. So I want to be a part of giving that to other people. And, but so I transferred that source onto those ideas, but it was still something outside of myself. It's, you know what I mean? That like I'm giving all the power to something over there, and then I'm in service of that. And then I'm putting it on other people, which I've now come to see since in my own exploration after the George Floyd killing. And I started to really look at the structural racism and all that. And I'd always hated the whole missionary thing, but I started to realize in like 2022, oh, I've been a missionary just for this secular set of ideas, not created by Jesus, but this other source guy. Oh, yeah. Like that is still a shocking thing for me to say. That's not it's not happy news for me.
Yeah. No, you had to weigh. You had the way. The way is the ideas. Some people have the way as the person, it's the way of being Werner and whatever. And they are inextricable. And also the work is ever, is like loose, like the text or whatever. It's like, oh, so anything that anyone wrote in a document in any kind of way becomes part of the work. And I can tell you, because me and the other consultants in our firm, ALS, the technical affiliate at one point, because as Werner had reemerged and all the leadership shit was coming out again, and they tried to start relicensing everybody, and like there's like 18 different licenses you'd have, and Alan Scherer was like, fuck, like I'm not doing any of this. Like no, like we're gonna I wrote the shit on a napkin with you in a bar back in the we're not, and so we got out of that, but then we tried to analyze one weekend in Woodstock, New York. The three of us got together in the firm at the time and broke down what are we actually stuck to in these contracts, and like what is it besides Alan just being able to do whatever the hell he wants because of the personal relationship, right? Integrity is fine. Like you don't have the same rules if you know someone, which is direct, also not just that part, but still very much here, right? So people have their personal conversations and they have different sets of agreements than other people. But we couldn't, like their definitions. I mean, I don't know that Landmark has ever produced a contract that's enforceable, frankly. But sure as fuck, those licensing ones aren't. Because the amount of stuff that they just call the work, which is just like, hey, since I started talking in 1971, everything I've ever said and anything you ever said when you were in a room with me is the work. And that's been incorporated. And if you put a slide deck together and you had one slide that had some of our shit and one slide is your, some of yours, no matter if you had like that's the work. I mean, it's absurd.
Well, they do claim.
It doesn't mean anything. Like the work, the ideas, the exercises that produced our it's just such a bullshit thing. The exercises that produce the experience people have in the forum, the exercises and the environment do the work. And sure, you got to be talking about heavy stuff. You have to have it be emotional. You have to have whatever. But all the different groups, some of their spin changes. It's always got that 50s bullshit in it. It's always got the responsibility. It's always got the integrity. It's always got whatever. But it's the exercises, that environment that produce it. And then they just talk for another 80 years straight with all these other concepts that Werner thinks are connected. And it doesn't fit in a way. It's not a system of thinking. It is like the forum is a body of distinctions. It's just, we are going to shoot 100 conversations at this giant group of people in an insanely stressful and weird environment structured to produce an emotional response. And then we're going to sell you shit on the back end. And like, that's it. So when we think about, integrity, that was them re-explaining what happened in the course with their work. You didn't have a breakthrough. You didn't get rid of your fucking headache if you did the headache exercise, which a lot of other seminars did that one as well.
You never could get it.
Reasons they disappear that. Yeah.
Yeah, like you can, right? I can still do that trick, right? But I know also it's not what they were talking about. It's not a correlate. The same way that structural integrity is a conversation is not a correlate unless you're really trying to control people. Without integrity, nothing works. Like, so that every tiny fucking thing anyone ever does, you can call out their integrity. And we all know damn well that while maybe it has started degrading, some can lose a chunk of integrity. It can be missing a piece. It can be not as designed and worked for the next 150 years pretty damn well.
Just as Boeing, right?
Yeah, and so like it's a useful concept until you get weird and extreme with it and try to like retroactively apply it to people's experiences and then push it in the future to apply to everything. It's just a code you control people by. And it's not why I had the feeling I had in the forum. Like that was, I heard somebody sharing stuff, right? That is like the mechanics of that, which insight is available in therapy. Insight's available, in a conversation with a friend. If you have an open mind, insight's available by fucking thinking about things, right? Like you think about something in a certain way, but like they have a specific emotional one that has nothing to do with enrollment. Certain, like the actual thing certainly has nothing to do with sales. It has nothing to do with anything. The work, the ideas, and the experience that people have in the courses, in my view, and sounds like John Hunter's and some other people who have been studying are mutually exclusive. There's a reason they used to say, because forum leaders could read the phone book and it would transform the room, kind of thing.
Okay,
because
but let's talk about that for a second, because
Yeah.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I think that ties very much to our thing we're talking about power. So why would it possibly be that somebody could read the phone book and your life could transform? And this is something they know, and they taught us about this, which they would say it's because of how you listen. So now they just transferred the responsibility, right, for my insight to me.
Yeah.
But then they take the credit, right? So it's like, all right. Well, and forum leaders, even to those of us that didn't know who Werner was or whatever, but forum leaders are the gods in that universe. They are the truth makers, because it's in the forum, the initial course, which if we put the sort of, lens on it, the cultish lens, I would say the forum is the indoctrination program. Like that is where you get indoctrinated into the ideas and the distinctions. And while they advertise it and they say like, hey, you're going to like set aside what you know and then come and fully surrender to this for a weekend. And then at the end of the weekend, if you don't like it, you can take that off. Well, that's really great if you don't understand anything about mind control, brainwashing. I mean, that is some CIA 1950s stuff that they studied and, Chinese communism and all this stuff.
So talk for 80 hours straight, and then you just, hey, if you don't like it, let it go. You're like,
because they flood your brain, right? So they flood your, and I understand. I talked to somebody to the forum recently. They no longer say things. They've learned. Landmark is really smart. So they do actually hear the criticism. They don't actually hear the underpinnings. They hear the top thing that could get them sued. So they now know telling people you absolutely cannot take notes makes them look bad. So they're like, well, you can take notes, but we really strongly recommend it against it. And then there's a whole kind of group shaming thing. If you're not going to agree to take the notes, if you have
it's
to
just
be
like the bathroom shit. I mean, you can go as long as you don't mind having an 80-minute interaction with someone at the door, and then on the back end, you might as well piss your pants if you're going to get dealt with at every stage, right?
Well, but there's a social pressure. See, there's a lot of power and privilege dynamics in here, I think, that we're not aware of. And as I've been teaching a class about safe practitioners, how do we really be safe and ethical in our ideas? And one of the big things we've been talking about is being awake and aware to the social pressures in a group. So what it takes for somebody in a group of 100 or so to raise their hand and say, hey, I got your recommendation. I got what you're saying. I got how important it is. I got what it means. I got all that. And I'm not going to do it. I'm going to defy you. That is not a lot of people that can do that.
I mean, it's hard enough for us in a group of 6 people at dinner. If we just really don't want to buy another bottle of wine and everyone's saying, let's get some more wine, just go, okay. And then, you're going to pay for more wine, but I didn't want any, but okay.
So that's one of the big ways that power is in these groups is the leader has the ultimate power because he, she, they have some kind of knowledge, expertise, experience that we don't have. So we're gonna, and we want something, right? All that's all been set up. That everything about the environment is totally conditioned. One of the things I said,
something at stake.
Exactly. Doing these kind of shows, like Mark and I are learning, like we're not in charge of how people are hearing this. We're not in charge. We're not in charge. We're just not, we're putting out ideas and thoughts and questions, mostly questions, because as you get close to the line, confronting the line, I got questions. So these forum leaders have absolute power.
Yeah.
And
the advanced course is in like the full demo. Like they're doing what you're talking about explicitly as a program.
How so?
Where they're like, they're full, advanced course being about groups, supposedly, right? It's the next level of transformation out.
No one gets it till everyone gets it.
But it's just a group of individuals, and that's how they're treating it. And it's staged, right? I mean, every element of these things is just staged and structured. Interrogate shotguns in a landmark form, where they're like, oh, we were going to do this one piece of the course, but since you all are such assholes and you can't get here on time, I don't think I should I even lead? They do this like huffy thing, and then they have the group of participants, start begging and please, no, I know, I'll come on time. And the advanced course, that's the whole fucking thing, is them setting each other off again. If someone's late, they just sit in the back of the room. I shit in the back of the room with Richard Condon for a full session between the breaks. At no point did he go up to the front of the room during the one session. I went up at a certain point to do the next break and then give the direction for what everybody had to do, because he was unwilling to lead because they didn't know how to lead. But it doesn't matter, because no matter if you got up and you tried to arrogantly take control of the room, or if you're hey, everybody, and you try to, no matter your approach, it was going to be wrong. Yeah. And so they structure it in where at certain points, the group controls itself. And it controls itself towards landmark aims, because what is the whole game in the advanced course? 75 people having the breakthrough called, we all came back from fucking dinner on time. And then crying about it, as if this was going to have a massive wave in the rest of their, and once you just, what the fuck just happened? Is that the source of my biggest breakthrough? Did I actually have a breakthrough in how to lead a group? Or did we just get controlled and the group generated landmark thinking, which is the point, right?
That's really important what you just said right there, because even as you're talking, I'm kind of thinking, well, Exene, what's so wrong with that? What's wrong with that? Everybody plays out their personality structures and then the group organizes to fulfill on an agreement that they have as a group. So they go to move. I mean, a lot of people would call that teamwork, right? They go to move as a team. Sure. And then all of a sudden it's well, okay, well, isn't that good? Isn't that a good skill for us to learn? Except for you just brought in the point, but in service of what? In service of this kind of artificial thing. And I think it's their thing. And I think the belief is that it translates, into the rest of your life.
Always that it translates. Everything. If you're dealing with the same way they work it in reverse, right? If you're dealing with something in life, that's how you're going to do the forum. That's a great way to just shoot down every aspect of someone's life, as if the fact that I'm having a problem and I'm doing this course because I'm stuck somewhere means I've got to throw the baby out with the bathwater, which again, in my story, I was walking into it. I'm fuck, man, I don't know where things are going. I'm going to come in blank slate and whatever. Most people don't come in that stupidly and that kind of hopeless already. But that is they're if you start breaking down the analogies and what's supposed to transfer to other places in life, you realize, cool, we had 75 people treat each other like fucking maniacs, Lord of the Flies kind of shit in those advanced courses. People try to lead and everyone just starts screaming at it and making fun of, get off the stage, you don't get it, I get what the real leadership looks like,
you don't know how to restore integrity.
And they come back from break once, and someone please still 20 years later show me where that is. And I do and I've done that work in the real world, that exercise never translated. There was nothing there except for getting tired and getting worn down, and some marks for reasonable points. Nobody's willing to say anything. Right. Nobody stands up and disagrees with anything. Anyone that's taking charge, whether it's a participant at that point, and certainly the forum leader, once they beg them enough to come, or the advanced course leaders, since they weren't always forum leaders after a while, to come back up and let's do the course the way it's designed, and then we'll carry on. Not understanding that is the way it's designed, folks. It's designed to break you down and then generate an insight that you believe is transferable. And I challenge that transferability, because sure, I'm a lot better at being on time for things. I was after landmark than I had been prior. I'm probably worse at this point, and some of that's just pendulum swinging kind of shit. But that's also because I live in the world where we all know, oh, you're going to run exceedingly late. That probably makes sense to communicate. The professional world already knew that. My friends don't give a shit if someone's 5 minutes late,
Yeah.
and there's no reason to have a panic attack about it or see it as a fundamental failure of your own integrity as a human, because only a fucking maniac would lay that on somebody because they came back from a break.
You just pointed out something. I just saw something. It's so interesting exploring this work from sort of this distance, right? From having gotten some real distance from it and not having any accountability in the matter. I'm quite apathetic. People are sort of like, "Oh, you're out to destroy Landmark." No, I'm not. Grant Landmark is. I don't. It's not my job to save them anymore. It used to be my job to save them. Now it's just not. And if they survive, great. If they don't, great. Like it's and it's taken me 4 years to be able to say that. It's really great.
Yeah.
But Chris Shelton brought this point up to me the other day, and I just heard it in what you said, which is if the design of a program, right, and you just went through this whole excellent example of, kind of create this problem. So you create an artificial problem called, this person was late or these 3 people were late or whatever. We couldn't, as a group, we can't be our word as a group. And the example we're using is that they are not back in time. And then you let them do all the things groups do, but basically you're breaking down all of that stuff. You're creating a blank space, right? You're taking all the shit out of the thinking, out of the environment by letting it play out. All of that. I get it. And then when people are finally sort of surrender, they're open, they're accessible, they're exhausted, they're frustrated, whatever, but they get to the point of surrender. Then, see, here's the thing. They sell this as discovery for yourself. You don't discover anything yourself. You discover exactly what they put in that moment. So, right? So everybody surrenders, and then the leader goes back to the front of the room and explains, and you're now, completely open, malleable state, explains to you what just happened, what it means, and what it means for you in your life. And you go, yes. But here's what I think the cosmic joke
doesn't mean
is.
anything, by the way.
It says that's in the forum. By now you have meaning. You get to. You're now the creator of meaning in the advanced course. So, but what I think is funny is there's all this emphasis on discover for yourself, but you're not discovering much of anything for yourself. No. You're discovering exactly what they're telling you to discover when they're telling you to discover it. I think the magic or the manipulation, they're close, of programs like of LGATs and programs like the Forum and the Advanced Course is that it's sort of this mass scale brainwashing. I mean, it is a kind of if you read the origin, I looked up the origins of brainwashing the other day because I was just curious, because people were yelling at me because I was calling it that. But the more I read about it, I'm like, oh, but it kind of is that. I sort of like take your brain, empty it out, and then I put stuff in. And then you think that stuff is you, except for then you go use it. Except for then you go try to use it in your life and it doesn't work.
No, it doesn't work. It's not you. And it's, I was making off a recent episode of yours when people were like using the word inquiry. It's the same bullshit. You're not inquiring into jack. There is no open inquiry. Like you when somebody creates a hypothetical and then creates the framework that you're thinking in. And sure, I guess you can pick what you're going to think about during that conversation. Like which racket am I going to look at? Kind of like saying like, what's my area? Like the only thing you're choosing is kind of like where to point something. When there's nothing, you're not inquiring into anything or discovering anything for yourself. Mm-mm. You are inquiring in a way that's already set up, which is just literally not inquiring. You're just being led to. And all those exercises produce conclusions, right? There's no like, oh man, I totally see my racket running right now. And like, it's cool. I'm going to run with it. Like, I'm just going to hold on to that one. Like, that's the wrong answer. Like, there's no inquiry that's allowed to like end with you just allowing yourself to be the human you already are. That's bad, right? Which is the other thing about self-help is the constant, and speaking of things that are built into cultures to maintain power dynamics between people, good enough. And, people feeling deficient and you're not okay the way you are right now. And so we're going to change, but then we're going to lay over this bullshit, of course, about, no, but you really are okay. Like Mark, you made a joke a little while ago, right? All the weird double speak where it's just like, no, you're whole and complete the way you are, but your fucking integrity's out and you're like, your life doesn't work. And depending on what they need on you in a given conversation and what's useful, you go one direction or the other. But the whole thing, just like marketing, which is the field I'm in now. So I've got out of self-help to go through a much larger, more damaging field.
I was going to say, yeah, you're the master controller there.
Yeah, when I really want to go sheer evil, I'll just become a finance bro, right? We're just playing in magic games that like leave everybody else behind. So, but like, marketing is that, right? I mean, that's always been the criticism is marketing was invented to when the whole situation out here shifted and then people were making shit that people needed, and then businesses, and when businesses control every decision that's made, like they do in Western culture and in America in particular, everything is money driven first, and it became about what do we do with the stuff to produce? Like we want to keep growing. How do you keep growing is you must convince people that they need the stuff that you have, even if they don't. Right. So Edward Bernays, if you want to do like, again, like I'm studying, so have fun with talent, but like Bernays back in the day, like the grandfather of propaganda and of PR, and they're not unrelated. It was the same game, different client. Right. But I mean, literally the reason most of us might eat bacon and like a dense meal, right? That idea that like it's a really heavy caloric meal that happens to have a bunch of dairy stuff in it to start your day is marketing. That was Edward Bernays with a bacon client and who started polling doctors, and you pull together a bunch of doctors and you ask them a question like, given what we know about, 1920, right? Given what we know about, calories and like how they burn over time, would you say it would make sense that a high caloric meal first thing in the morning would give you sustain if you ate breakfast that way? And 500 doctors responded to this little poll and was like, yeah, sure, that makes sense. And boom, all of a sudden the campaign wasn't to sell a particular kind of bacon or bacon at all. The word in America became what's healthy for you is to get all your calories early on. And guess what gives you the best? It ain't oatmeal, right? Oatmeal ain't going to get that shit done. Frosted mini wheats or whatever other random, that's not going to what's going to get it done is these kind of food. We still eat breakfast like that today, right? So marketing has that influence, but it's all about, what you're doing. You know how that could be better? And that's the friendly version, right? Because the other version is you feel like shit about yourself and everyone's beautiful and everyone's constructed. And now at this point, they're not even real. They're like AI. But that deficit is the game played. And it's an easy game to play in self-help because literally that's what people are looking for. They're literally coming in saying, I'm not happy with where I am in some way, right? In some portion, some of us far more than others, perhaps. And now I'm starting to believe you have the answer. And if they give you an answer that they claim fixes everything, you tend to get in because your bad self-esteem that you had maybe already is being love bombed, right? Your the things that seem familiar to you, like if you had a yelling dad or a strict dad or something, and that old you just need more structure in your life. That's the answer for everything. Well, shit, good luck. You're in luck, right? Boy, we have
it for you, yeah.
All the Baloo control you can imagine down to every task. We learned it from Scientology. So that's another thing that exists in a big way in this culture that's extremely harmful. And obviously for some groups and at intersection points more so than for others. And self-help literally exists in the same way that, religion, a lot of religions are formed in that same way. How do I feel differently? And it's don't worry, it's not pointless. I mean, don't try to change the system you're in. Just work on yourself. It's the century of the self, right? That is the culture that came out of marketing, was century of the self, of which Werner got rich and powerful.
Human potential is known as the me movement. I mean, it is the origin of the me movement. It's the me
generation. That's why it doesn't translate to systems. Because, and if you hear it in all the conversations you've had with people, if you talk to forum leaders, there's just this weird constant jump. We've said it 4 times here today, right? There's you working on yourself in your internal state and well, that's not a me thing or a landmark thing. That's just a human thing. And which is just this weird jump to some people do study humans and human cultures. They're called anthropologists. And I haven't fucking met one in one of these courses yet. But to hear a life coach or someone talk, you'd think that they actually had some experience beyond their anecdotal interactions with literally dozens of people that they have put their own views on and then form these big conclusions. Well, that's just human beings just have it's in them to choke people. And yet some of us don't. That's weird.
Most.
You
Yeah.
know, like I wonder what the intervening point is in the between. And it's because like the folks, if you're really enmeshed in that kind of environment, that kind of self-help, that you only, you can only work on yourself so much. And by the way, you might be going in a terrible direction. Like the people who, like those of us who worked on ourselves, be more like Werner, like talk about a bad fucking deal. Like, no,
Right.
that's a bad, like now I can get away with it, and I could, because I've got enough of the stuff where I can emulate that approach, and people do respond. I can walk into rooms in business world and even looking like this, old stodgy conservatives take the confident white man approach, and they'll just listen in a way they'll listen to nobody else.
Oh, I can promise you it's not that way as a woman.
Yeah.
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 Try that as a black queer woman or a black trans woman, and see how people are listening in a room. They're not. They're probably killing you, literally trying to get you out of the room. But I can walk in almost anywhere, and if I'm confidently talking, and even like Dunning-Kruger level, like just surface level, and if it just sounds like I know more than something, than the other people in the room, they will listen to me all day. If they think they can get more money or power out of me, which is the way you every day.
And I think that's a perfect place for us to put a pin in it, and we'll end this piece of the conversation and move on to another. And I'd like to bring that up in part 2 as we do this, because these conversations are so wonderful. Exene, you could listen to you forever, right? Like the way that your mind works is great, right? So let's actually talk about that, how those structural things impact different communities, different people in the next part of our conversation. Right now, is there any sort of contact or social media that you want to share with us so that people can see what other stuff you're up to?
Yeah, I don't know how much they'd be into it in this crowd, frankly.
Okay, no worries.
I'm not hard to find. You can search my name, and there's not a lot of other people with that name, and so I'll come up pretty easily.
Wonderful. Great. So we're gonna leave it there for now, and join us for part 2, and you'll hear the rest of our conversation. This has been Confronting the Line.